Well, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Lowy Institute. My name is Michael Wesley, I'm the Executive Director, and it's with great pleasure that we welcome Barry O'Farrell, this time as Premier of New South Wales, back to the Lowy Institute. Mr O'Farrell delivered a lecture here in May of 2010 when he was Leader of the Opposition in New South Wales. In that speech, he spoke about New South Wales' international opportunities and obligations in this rapidly globalising world. He spoke of the need for the state to go onto the front foot and seize the opportunities presented by the big, dynamic, emerging economies in the Asia region. He spoke of the enduring and growing importance of fostering the state's human and intellectual capital as a vital preparation for a future beyond the minerals boom. He spoke of enlightened self-interest, of his vision to promote New South Wales as a national centre of excellence in development finance, a state where ideas are exchanged and partnerships are formed. It was a big international vision for the state, and since being elected, the O'Farrell government has methodically delivered on it. As promised, the O'Farrell government created a parliamentary secretary for Asia-Pacific trade. As promised, Mr O'Farrell became the first Premier of New South Wales to lead trade delegations to China in May and India in November, both within the first 6 months of the new government. Now, we at the Lowy Institute have a close interest in both India and China, and indeed in the complex changes that the rise of these two continental economies are causing in Australia's region. So we wanted to catch the Premier just after his return from India and before he goes on holidays to hear his impressions and thoughts about that complex giant and the obligations and opportunities it holds for New South Wales. Barry O'Farrell was elected Premier of New South Wales in March of 2011. He has been in the New South Wales Parliament as the member for Ku-ring-gai since 1995. He joined the Shadow Cabinet in 1998 and served as opposition spokesman on education, health and treasury. Prior to being elected, he was the State Director of the New South Wales Liberal Party and worked for both federal and state governments. Mr O'Farrell has a Bachelor of Arts in Australian History and Aboriginal Studies from the ANU. He was elected Leader of the New South Wales Liberal Party and Leader of the State Opposition on the 4th of April 2007. And most importantly, he is a fellow supporter of the West Tigers. Premier, welcome back to the Lowy Institute.
Isn't it interesting where you find rugby league supporters? Thank you very much for that, and can I apologise for my lateness. I was detained happily, voluntarily by police at Hurstville on some statewide policing issues. Can I acknowledge a number of Consul Generals in the room, including Amit Dasgupta, who's the Indian Consul General. Can I acknowledge a number of members of the trade delegation that I took with me to India, but can I welcome you all. When I last spoke at the Lowy Institute, Kevin Rudd was Prime Minister, Libya had not yet experienced the Arab Spring, and the Euro still had a pulse. And closer to home here in New South Wales, I was Opposition Leader. A New South Wales Premier hadn't visited India for 4 years, and 2.1 million people hadn't had a chance to vote for change in an upcoming election campaign. And I can put my hand on my heart and say that whilst almost anyone I spoke to in the months leading up to the election campaign seemed very confident that change would be the choice, I drew no comfort or security from pundits, oracles and the so-called inevitabilists who could see a future that I wouldn't presume. In 16 years in opposition, I'd seen too many pollsters and oracles contradicted by the brutal truth of democracy on election day because some politician had assumed that others would do the hard work for them. In Australia, many of us are used to hearing the heroic mantras from pundits and oracles who tell us that India, our land of opportunity, promises to stoke economic engines for decades to come through what Michelle Grattan has described as an Indian economic bonanza. Now, I greatly admire and certainly don't doubt the resolve and the achievements of India's government, business sector and its people in making this come true. And in fact, the IMF suggests that over the next 5 years, a growth in India for the economy will be around 8%. But what I fear is that we risk taking for granted that India's economic success will inevitably wash towards our opportune Asia-Pacific location without any particular effort being required on our part. Put simply, I just don't do inevitable. Perhaps that's the mind shift that Michael sought to explain in his recent book when he wrote about the insular nation. The truth is that inevitable is nothing more than the evidence of hard work. And while we can study the high-level data on bilateral trade and demand and supply, align our strategic objectives of India and New South Wales more closely, and identify the commercial opportunities that exist, ultimately, the success of any international relationship comes down to people, personal relationships, trust and reputation, and it happens on a week in and a week out basis. And that's why my New South Wales Liberals and Nationals team has been determined to make developing our relationship with India, with Indian leaders in government, business and other sectors, with our own strongly backed and linked Indian-Australian community, such a priority. In February 2010, I visited India for the first time with a much smaller, a boutique, a beautifully formed, small senior trade delegation. On my return here at the Lowy Institute, I set out a policy trajectory for much of our intended trade investment approach, should we win government, and that included that I'd lead trade delegations to China and India within our first 6 months. And Michael, I want to correct the record because someone else will. In 5 months, 6 months cut off in September, so I was actually 2 months late in relation to India, but there was a state budget that had to be dealt with. It included a goal to establish New South Wales as the first place in Australia to do business and to seek Sydney's establishment as a global financial capital. It was about driving economic growth by growing trade investment opportunities supported by an export and investment advisory board, whose chair at the ANZ Bank's Warwick Smith joined us on our delegation to India, and the establishment of a multicultural business advisory panel, now chaired by Nihal Gupta, who's with us here today, tasked to work with the Indian and other enterprising communities to leverage those assets to help grow the state's economy. Our policy direction was shaped by the input of New South Wales and Indian business people, by our universities, our not-for-profits, our think tanks, the advice of the Indian Consul General, Mr. Dasgupta, and I'm pleased to have the chance to also publicly acknowledged by the work that happens here week in, week out by the Lowy Institute. You know, the work of the Lowy Institute is remarkable in terms of its depth, in terms of its non-partisanship, and in terms of its desire for greater engagement in this region. And that's something that certainly I and my government strongly support. So I'm grateful for the Lowy Institute for this opportunity to report on some of the results of my first trade mission to India as Premier, and to outline my plans for continuing to build on the valuable relationships that we're endeavouring to develop. Returning to Sydney, I think 19 days ago, inspired and encouraged by the warmth of the reception we received in India, the genuine interest in New South Wales' renewed engagement, and with the knowledge that personal rapport had been established with many individuals, just drives me to continue developing this relationship. I resolved that if we were to put all the inevitabilists, if we were to prove the inevitabilists correct, that we must invest in time, we must invest in genuine intent. So our approach to deepening our successful engagement with India centres on 4 key elements. To be consistent, to be a consistent and trustworthy friend, to be competitive, to deliver real and strategic outcomes for the people of New South Wales and India, that should be our focus, and fourthly, to develop a pathway and targets for a long partnership. We want this to be a 400-run partnership and not a fleeting meteor of 20 or 25 runs. As the Lowy Institute's Rory Medcalf is keen to remind us, New South Wales first exported coal to India in 1799. The Sydney-born Indiophile John Lang established India's Free Press, and the Australian cricketer Frank Tarrant umpired the first England-India Test match at the Gymkhana ground in Burma. We have significant cultural and commercial links. underpinned first by our shared colonial heritage and business language, and more recently, of course, that most precious of institutions and heritages, democracy, which in our case includes sharing a national day on the 26th of January. Importantly, valuable work in our relationship with India occurs week to week here in New South Wales. We welcome the Minister for Commerce and Industry, Mr Anand Sharma, to Sydney in May, where we discuss education services, resources, the India-Australia Free Trade negotiations, a discussion I continue when I had in India. I also met with the Indian Chamber of Commerce and Industry when they were coming through Sydney on their way to Choggum earlier this year. Since my February visit to India last year, I've appreciated the counsel of the Consul General, Mr Das Gupta, who is with us this morning, and of course my government's been working with Indian-based investors on proposals for investment in New South Wales and trade opportunities in India. I'm determined that my sincere intentions to develop the cultural and economic relationship between New South Wales and India will be built on more than simply symbols. Strong relationships are built on trust and following through on commitments such as returning to visit India as promised and recommitting to annual visits to India to promote trade and investment. In any friendship, of course, there will be surprises, and I think it's an asset when your history brings both a maturity of friendship that lets us tell each other honestly if things get off track. And I'm pleased to say that at various times, the Trade Mission appreciated frank discussions about where we can make things better, as one would expect of a consistent and trustworthy friend. The second element, of course, is to be competitive. Last week, two dark clouds reminded me of why inevitabilism is death. The Australian reported that working days lost to strikes had reached 101,030 days in the September quarter, the highest in 7 years. And the economist Henry Ergus wrote that industrial practice on our wharves and domestic shipping routes are winding back the clock on modernising Howard government reforms which delivered jobs, opportunities and wealth to working men and women and their families. And New South Wales bilateral trade with India represents $1.73 billion, a 95% increase over the past 5 years. And if we're not only to defend but also to grow that relationship, our only guarantee to secure the inevitable is to keep lifting our own economic growth. While our economy is currently the envy of many developed countries, we're having ourselves on if we assume that the relativities will save us. So whether Europe and North America takes the tough decisions that they need or not, we must accept that the success or failure in securing new and ongoing contracts to supply resources, goods and services to growing markets such as India will depend on whether or not we have the guts to take the tough decisions to live within our means. When we came to government in March, the first of all our priorities unashamedly was to make New South Wales number one again and to improve the performance of the New South Wales economy. By growing business investment at an average rate of 4% per year to 2020 and targeting GSP growth by an average of 1.5% per year to 2020 with specific industry growth targets. These targets include doubling tourism, growing critical industries, increasing the value of primary production and mining production, and growing exports from New South Wales. None of us would have enjoyed the opportunities we seek were it not for the private and social enterprises and individuals and investors willing to back their own ideas and to take investment risks. State governments can't influence monetary policy. We can't fix Europe's economic malaise, or we can't fix Europe's impact upon our global marketplace. What we can do, though, is to maximise our own competitive position, and that's by getting our own state's fiscal house in order, giving a clear idea of our own strategic priorities, and investing in productive and strategic economic public infrastructure, opening the door to private and social enterprise participation and investment in the public sector economy, whether in infrastructure, services or thought leadership, improving the services we need to invest for our future, including education and skills, and putting downward pressure on cost of living increases. Our economic and fiscal strategy must also engage with national issues. Our national productivity is going in the wrong direction. Productivity growth accelerated from an annual pace of 1.3% during the 80s to 2.1% during the 90s. but productivity growth has slowed in recent years, averaging only 1.1% growth per annum during the past decade and 0.6% on average over the past 5 years. Last financial year, productivity growth fell by 1.1%. So in addition to Labor's carbon tax, which attacks our strategic competitive advantage as a unilateral own goal, the credit in the bank achieved by the Hawke, the Keating and the Howard governments is being fast spent by the incumbent federal government. In our first 40 weeks or so, we've tackled productivity in the public sector here in New South Wales by reining in public sector expense growth and strengthening the public sector wages policy and implementing our principles of contestability, starting with franchising Sydney's ferry operations. Our record budget capital allocation of $62.5 billion will create a strong infrastructure pipeline open to the private sector for investment, collaboration and operation, including fast-tracking the North West Rail Link, improving the interface between Port Botany, Sydney Airport and our arterial road network, building a new convention centre through a public-private partnership, long-term lease transactions for the desalination plant and Port Botany, and selling electricity generators, development sites and the Cabora coal mine so that we can reinvest the proceeds into providing that economic infrastructure that's so critical for economic growth. We've also sought to encourage private sector employment growth by providing payroll tax rebates for new jobs and abolishing some of the taxes that occur on development, given the importance of particularly the property sector to the state's economy. And New South Wales must offer competitive investment conditions for foreign capital, and we welcome the interest of several Indian companies in New South Wales resources-related infrastructure. I was pleased that Trade Mission delegates concerned with infrastructure finance joined with me during my meeting with Montak Singh Ahluwalia, the Deputy Chairman of the Planning Commission in New Delhi. For every $2 overseas investors put into the Indian economy, $1 is exported by Indian companies. I want New South Wales to be in the best position to compete for the $17.5 billion in Indian investment destined to overseas subsidiaries and acquisitions, and to back this commitment, we have as a government a New South Wales business office located in Mumbai, and we're just opening up an office of Destination New South Wales, which is our major events, our tourism, our business events office in India as well. Our third issue is delivering real outcomes for the people of India and Australia. The only purpose of economic policy should be to improve the choices and opportunities, the prosperity and quality of life for our citizens today and into the future. A strong theme of my discussion with people in India was about partnerships. We understand that India's development is critical to driving global economic growth, and my government and our business sector here in New South Wales stands ready to partner with Indian leaders in business because it'll benefit us in this region and the world as well as India's own citizens. So our objective in our trade mission were on ways in which New South Wales and India can achieve mutual goals which will benefit people both here and there. And they included promoting Sydney as a financial capital. Both Sydney and Mumbai and the state of Maharashtra share goals and characteristics as significant financial capitals. Meetings with the Governor of the state and the Chief Minister achieved an agreement to work towards a state-to-state relationship with Maharashtra, which, like New South Wales, is the headquarters of major banks and insurance companies in India. And I'm looking forward to welcoming the Chief Minister who plans to visit New South Wales with a high-level business delegation. Now, we all know, particularly this time of year with the second test against New Zealand opening today in Hobart, that cricket is a welcome symbol of this relationship. And so I was pleased to announce, whilst on the visit, that the New South Wales Maharashtra Cricket Cup, with a Premier's 11 and a Chief Minister's 11 to be played every 2 years for charity, proving the value of sport in deepening trade relationships in building these economic opportunities. I often have to explain to people in Sydney that whilst people do go to that second test match, the Boxing Day test, to watch the cricket, you've no idea how much business goes on in those corporate suites. The same is true of cricket in India, and I'm happy to go and watch Tiddlywinks if it's going to do business for this state. But thankfully, the Indians, like the Australians, have a passion for cricket. The great benefit of the Maharashtra Cup and the matches proposed for the Premier's 11 and the Chief Minister's 11 is it will also benefit a Bangalore charity, 40k, with students from 4 New South Wales universities and TAFE are going to India each year to support the works of the 40k Foundation, which was established by a student from UTS here in New South Wales to provide education to those in India who might not otherwise receive primary education. Sydney's success in securing the Australian Centre for Finance and Regulation, along with the future capacity of Barangaroo as a new finance district, adds to our appeal as a headquartering option for Indian multinationals in this region. The trade mission enabled the Sydney Airports Corporation to open talks with major Indian airlines to encourage direct air services to Sydney and Mumbai, and we celebrated the success of the Sydney company Laser Vision in winning a $5.5 million contract to develop a large-scale multimedia attraction at a religious centre in southwestern India. Both important because we've seen an enormous growth in those people travelling between both our countries from 400 to over 5,000, and a need for direct flights to make that trade even better. And secondly, whilst the laser vision sounds not as important as it is, just think about this. 20 million people are adherents of this religion. What Laser Vision, a New South Wales company, has been asked to do is effectively make an electronic or digital version of that religion's Bible. It's as important as that to their adherents in India and around the world. Secondly, the Trade Mission promoted New South Wales, of course, as an education destination. The Consul General alerted me earlier to the Minister for Human Resources, Kapil Sibal's challenge to develop an additional 1,000 universities, and 55,000 technical colleges over the next 10 years in order to cope with the projected increase in the number of Indian children going to college from the current 16 million to 45 million. It is staggering growth, and it represents a staggering opportunity for New South Wales universities and our training institutions to reach out and collaborate with Indian institutes to help meet that need. And I was delighted to meet Minister Sibal in New Delhi to discuss this in person. 3 Vice-Chancellors from New South Wales top universities and the head of TAFE Sydney joined the Trade Mission, each developing strategic partnerships with Indian institutions, including Delhi University, the Indian Institute of Science and the LV Prasad Institute. We're confident that New South Wales curricula and other training providers have much to offer India to help meet its skills development needs, because one of the issues is that in order to upskill so many people over the period set, it won't be the traditional model of education. It will seek to embrace the digital economy that is alive and thriving in India, and it will be looking for the sort of content that we have great experience in providing training and higher education and even secondary education in this country. We're also, as I say, confident that we have much to help in relation to primary and secondary education. So I visited the Holy Child Auxilium School in New Delhi, where local staff and administrators are being upskilled and mentored by teachers from independent schools in New South Wales through the Association of Independent Schools of this state. Another success was the Memorandum of Understanding signed by Dr. Harry Haranath with the Mumbai Cricket Club, which will promote the sharing of New South Wales expertise in sports injury management and sports training programs, all about ensuring that our exports to India aren't just things that come from the ground, but come from the heads of those people who live above the ground in this state. We're positioning New South Wales as a secure and reliable supplier of resources for India, which currently receives half of Australia's gold exports and approximately 16% of all our coal exports. Delegation members included leaders of Xstrata, BHP and Gujarat NRE, and our good friend Arun is here today, who see India as the best growth prospect for both New South Wales coal resources and our natural gas. We conducted meetings with the Tata Group. We met with the CEO of Jindal Steel and Power, Naveen Jindal. We met with Ard Godrej, chairman of the Godrej Group, which sells, I think, a product to 500 million people each day, every day. And our fourth is to develop a pathway and targets for long partnerships. In New Delhi in 2006, former Prime Minister Howard recalled a comment Prime Minister Singh made during his 2000 visit to India, that although the two countries had much in common, they didn't do much together. When John Howard said, quote, "I hope to change that, not just by this visit, but over time," end quote, I think he recognised, as I do, that we become consistent and trustworthy friends by investing time in a genuine long-term relationship. Sydney's home to people from 187 different nationalities. We're fortunate that almost 250,000 of those people are of Indian ancestry. I have a Minister for Citizenship who likes to say that our greatest assets aren't the coal deposits under the ground, they're the diamonds that are above ground. And those diamonds have come from many backgrounds. Those diamonds have come from many cultural heritages and traditions. And in today's integrated global economy, the Indian expats, those of Indian origin and descent who serve as India's ambassadors overseas, with many who of course retain both family and economic ties with India, are some of the greatest assets we have in this state. We believe that our New South Wales multicultural community is one of the greatest assets of the state, especially when it comes to doing business within the Asia Pacific region. So the fourth element of my approach is to develop a pathway and targets for a long partnership, bringing together this vast resource of enterprising and educated Indian Australians and our accelerating direct engagement with India, in India, to evidence the genuine and personal ties that exist between us. Relationships do ultimately come down to people, such as Dr. Singh said to John Howard when he, quote, "Our people-to-people links have always been strong." And I want to make them even stronger and to develop a pathway for a very long partnership and set some targets for ourselves along the way. First, as Premier of the State, I intend to visit India every year and look forward to welcoming established and new Indian friends to New South Wales as often as they can visit, and I'll be actively encouraging them to do so. Secondly, we know government doesn't have all the answers, and we want to invite the ideas and innovation of the private, the not-for-profit, the tertiary sectors, the think tanks in a collaborative and fine-grained effort to diversify and deepen those personal links with India, and to ensure our engagement with India delivers a quality of trade and cultural relationship which is both transparent, which is ethical and is responsible. And you can count on my support for the Australia-India Roundtable, the leading non-government dialogue between influential Indians and Australians, convened of course by the Lowy Institute in Sydney and New Delhi, and the inaugural Gandhi oration to be held at the University of New South Wales on the 30th of January, the day Mahatma Gandhi was assassinated in 1948. We're also delighted to be a founding partner in the Australian-India Youth Dialogue, the brainchild of an Indian student at the Sydney University. If we're to avoid making costly strategic mistakes, we need to invest in these personal relationships that enable real trust and understanding and the occasional gutsy and obviously good decision, and provide an environment in which frank and fearless advice from friend to friend can be offered. Whilst a valuable step forward has been achieved on the uranium issue, I'd have preferred that within our two mature democracies, with our shared values and accountabilities in a robust Westminster system, we should have been able to resolve this to our mutual advantage much sooner. So I want to take up the challenge identified by former Prime Minister John Howard, who said in India in 2006, quote, "There's much our countries naturally have in common, but for a combination of reasons in the past, the potential has not been fully liberated." A lot can change in 22 months, including assumptions of the inevitable, whether it's our economic future or more prosaically, the cricket results. Amongst those things that were also happening when I last spoke at the Lowy Institute last May, our Australian cricket team was readjusting from years of world dominance, being thrashed by England in the Ashes series and being beaten, if not thrashed, by India in the World Cup. And we had yet to be revealed the truth of the state of New South Wales finances and the scale of the task ahead for my New South Wales and Liberal national team. Economic engines and bonanzas of any sort don't occur without hard work, without fiscal discipline, without honesty, and importantly, without engagement. And like me, I'm sure that neither Michael Clarke nor Indian captain MS Dhoni believes that the past presages or predicts any inevitabilities about the upcoming cricket season here in Sydney. And in the same spirit, I want to see New South Wales engage competitively in trade and investment with India to liberate that great potential that clearly exists. I'd like to see the oracles of destiny at the SCG put to the real test of skill, preparation and competition in January. So I'd like to leave the oracles in Delhi. I'd like to leave the inevitabilists, I can't say this word, inevitabilists to their hope and rely instead on the day-to-day hard work that goes with any good government that's committed to good policy and better outcomes. Because ultimately, that I believe is the best predictor of performance success in all that we have to do to rebuild our economy, to develop a deep and long-lasting relationship with our Indian friends and contribute to our goal of making New South Wales number one, is that hard work, is that engagement, is that commitment to real outcomes, not pretend outcomes. So thank you for having me here today, Michael. And I think I get to have questions now, and just don't ask me to say inevitabilists again. Thank you.
Look, thank you very much. Thanks very much, Mr. Premier. That's a really, I think, compelling speech, because there are those of us who would say that state governments traditionally haven't done foreign policy. We've got this interesting notion at the Lowy Institute that we call international policy. I think it's an attempt to find a composite of traditional foreign policy and the real things that are happening at other levels as well, economic engagement and the people-to-people engagement. And I think what you said today really shows that in a globalised world, and especially given the nature of Australia and India as federal democracies, there's a lot of very important work that needs to happen to build a strategic relationship at state-to-state level, and indeed states to national level. We'll take some questions from the floor. We've got about 20 minutes or so. Please identify yourself. This is being recorded, so it's on public record. Please raise your hand and identify yourself, and we'll bring a microphone. This gentleman here is first.
David.
David Morris, University of Sydney. Premier, congratulations on a very successful visit to India and a very successful visit to China as well, both in your first months as Premier as promised. And universities, businesses all appreciate the enormous value of visits such as this. And in fact, the work of state governments can be just as important to all of us in building relationships with important countries such as India as the national work that's just been referred to. I wanted to ask you about what happens in between visits. You've committed to annual visits, which is really very important. And in your visits that you've made as opposition leader and now as Premier, you've had a chance to look at the new offices up close in both India and in China. What is your personal vision, Premier, for those offices, and how can they deliver value for New South Wales industry? What are the actual outcomes you're looking for from those new offices, which is quite a new direction for New South Wales to be competing with other states on the ground in India?
And that's a good place to start, David. So in response to Michael's comment about state governments not doing foreign policy, well, I don't regard it as foreign policy. I regard it as doing trade and investment. And secondly, I think you're being kind to New South Wales and unkind to other states who have done it very well. So Brax and Brumby spent an enormous amount of time overseas, as Ted Baillieu has started to do as well. It's perhaps been done best to our north, starting from super salesman Peter Beattie all the way through. And of course, Mike Rand's turnaround of what was a rust bucket state of South Australia is due in no small part to his incredible number of visits around the world. And I know from my last visit, I know he is on the other side of politics, I know from my last visit just how deep his relationship with so many across India had become because of his constant attention to it. So, David, we do understand that we have to catch up, but I'm not interested in best practice. I'm interested in next practice. And I think we should be aiming to go beyond. And part of that follow-up is to make sure that when issues are raised on these delegations, there is the follow-through. There is the literal follow-up, because it's important to impress new friends at the first outing. And I want this to be an outing as however long the electorate is allowed to going to allow me to do it. But it's an outing that I'd like successive governments to follow as well. I'm absolutely certain that should there be a change of government in Queensland, just as there was a change of government in Victoria, that an incoming Premier will understand the importance of these relationships too. But it's also about demonstrating a willingness to sit down with people here about the opportunities that exist. So I have many cultural issues that exist within government. It is often hard to labyrinthine is probably a nice way of putting it to deal with New South Wales government. That's just as much true for people that want to come here and engage in export of education opportunities as it is for the resource sector. We need to fix that. But I was delighted in my February visit to both China and India, February 2010 visit, to be the first New South Wales politician to step foot in both our new trade offices. Other states have had trade offices for more than a decade. We had them, closed them, had them, closed them. We're back in the game. We're determined to keep them open. We're determined to try and expand them, not just in this region, but across the world. So those offices are important. Having visited them recently, we've come back with some ideas about how to strengthen them. I have to confess, because I think I was challenged on this the last time I was here, Michael, that having had more to do with with our consul generals in China and in India, I do recognise that the good work that they do, but I think there's some fine-grained work that individual states can and should do if we're to maximise the most out of the relationship. But following through, not missing an opportunity, and being clear about our objectives is what we need to do.
Thanks. We've got another question down here.
Premier Cameron O'Reilly from the Energy Retailers Association. In this city, we saw a rather messy process last weekend of changing Australia's policy towards uranium exports to India. And I wonder if over time we might see a change in policy in relation to uranium exploration in New South Wales. And quick second question, during your visit, did the topic of Bollywood come up and the making of Bollywood films in Sydney as opposed to Hollywood?
Well, there's a Bollywood film or series about to be filmed at Sydney Airport, which was one of the discoveries I learned during the mission. So Bollywood's alive and well in Sydney, as anyone who goes to community events often experiences. And I have to say that I'm one of those, unlike Mr Gupta who's with me, who stays firmly seated during the dinner and doesn't get up and dance because I just know what the Herald and the Telegraph would do with that photo. You know, many photos are taken of me. The worst are normally used, but that would be too great an opportunity for those photographers should they be present. So that's the reason, Consul General, that I don't dance at those events. That's my excuse, and I'm sticking to it. Can I say in relation to uranium exploration, we do have some hangover legislation from the 1970s in relation to uranium exploration in New South Wales. It did come up early this year after the election campaign. I do think that in light of the decision by the federal government to allow exports of uranium to India, that should be reconsidered. I noticed that Paul Howes gave me that advice after I'd expressed my opinion again about the stupidity of the uranium ban that the Rudd government had imposed. So, you know, with the encouragement of Mr Howes, I'm happy to say that the New South Wales government will have a look at that current ban on uranium exploration in New South Wales. We don't know. We don't know whether there is any uranium in New South Wales, so it may come to naught. But as I understand the existing regulations, if you happen to find something that might be uranium in New South Wales, you're not allowed to tell anyone about it. You're not allowed to take it out of the ground. We should at least be prepared to work out what resources we have across this state and then have a mature and sensible discussion about whether those resources should be exploited for the public good.
Thanks, Mr Premier. It occurs to me that Bollywood and uranium could probably make a great movie together. There's a lot of drama we saw last Sunday that has all the ingredients of a Bollywood film, butter chicken on Glebe Point Road or something like that. Look, quite seriously, before I go to the next question from the audience, I want to ask you a bit further about the question of perceptions, because whatever the pros and cons of the uranium issue, it went to Indian perceptions of Australia from an Indian point of view. And it'd be interesting, I think, for us to hear a bit more about your own experience in India, your visits to India. Have you had any surprises, not specifically on uranium, but just generally on Indian perceptions of Australia, and how has it influenced your thinking on how really a state government can influence Indian perceptions of Australia? It'd be interesting to hear.
Well, I think there's much more that we as a nation and certainly as states can do to try and extend an understanding across India, a very big country, about what it is we are and what it is we do. So no surprise that media reports the bad news or the scandals. And so I suspect that our image in India, for people that don't have relatives in this country, in recent years has been about the Indian student issue and has been about the refusal to sell uranium to India. The latter, which was raised with me for a long time, or at least since Mr Rudd made the decision, in this country by Indian Australians, and on 2 trips now to India, was always regarded as an issue of trust. I'm not certain they necessarily want to buy our uranium. I'm not sure that we'll actually end up selling them our uranium, but they wanted to know that they had access, like others, to purchase it, and didn't understand why others in the region were able to purchase it. But they, a long-standing friend, a massive democracy, if not the largest democracy in the world, were being excluded because of some government fee it imposed after the 2007 election win. So the good news in relation to the Indian student issue, Consul General, was that it's 18 months since I was last there. It does seem to have receded. It seemed to be less of an obstacle for those educational members of the trade delegation who went with me. It was raised least of all. The uranium issue was raised in most meetings before and after the decision was made. But, Michael, there is an enormous job that this country can do, and it can be done by the sorts of things that Harry Haranath is proposing. So amongst those things that in addition to those training programs that he signed an MOU on, in addition to putting together a Chief Minister's and Premier's biannual cricket event, which will support a local charity, we also handed out kit bags to 20 disadvantaged kids at that centre of cricket in Mumbai. And the only regret I had as I handed them over, and Harry will attest to this, is that I was just concerned that like a former Liberal Prime Minister who never lost the tag of Pig Iron Bob, that I might regret in later years that we encouraged a few more Indian cricketers to take up such a great game.
Okay, we've got three more questions from the floor, and I might take them all together so that we have time for the speaker to answer them. So I think Michael Wesley, and I'm Rory, so not to be confused with
sorry,
Michael
I'm
Wesley.
sorry, my apologies.
Yes,
I'm going mad.
Michael's my middle name.
But I'm looking at Michael, that's
yes,
the problem.
So Michael Wesley, and then this gentleman here, and then I think everyone else will get the back.
Premier, earlier this year we saw the Western Australian government sign an MOU with the National Reform and Development Commission of China to identify investment opportunities and to more or less manage the investment, the flow of Chinese investment into Western Australia. Is that a possible model of next best practice that might be on the agenda for New South Wales?
I should call you Rory, Michael, but it is, and it is an interesting approach. We've been, I suppose, focused on the traditional state-to-state, city-to-city relationships. That was certainly the flavour of discussions with both the mayors of Beijing and Shanghai during the China visit. But what Colin Barnett and the Western Australian government is doing does give us an opportunity to think not just about what they're doing, but how we might do better. But it's no surprise that Colin Barnett leads the field in this area. He very openly makes no secret of the fact that he'd far prefer to travel north from this continent rather than east across it.
Thanks, the gentleman here.
Dr. Harry.
Thank you, Premier. Dr. Harinath from Cricket New South Wales. Australia won the toss. New Zealand had 3 wickets down for 25. Peter got 2 wickets, and I think we are doing well, Premier, in Hobart. But apart from
let's just not get comfortable about it, Harry. There's a good team in town shortly.
Good thing, Premier, is first of all, I would like to thank you for what you've done for the game of cricket. But as you know, the cricket is a common link between the two countries. It opens the door with all the business houses, and all the business houses function with cricket at their side. So that was fantastic. And forming a bilateral relationship with Mumbai Cricket Association and the New South Wales has opened the doors for more sports to come and look at. Is the New South Wales government prepared or happy to help India in other sports, not only in cricket, like athletics, swimming, and hockey? And India hasn't won an athletics gold medal in Olympics. I think sport is a big industry in India. Are we, as a government of New South Wales, happy to help them in those?
Well, absolutely, Harry, and we of course have in the New South Wales Institute of Sport another model of how a state or a nation, through the Australian Institute of Sport, which was an initiative of the Fraser government, can seek to get greater sporting excellence. And of course, we should be encouraging as governments all around the world excellence in whatever field of endeavour that people want to pursue. So the New South Wales Institute of Sport stands ready to assist. I do have the same concerns that we'll, as we seem to have done by sending some of our better cricketers to England, end up regretting it. But that's the benefit of competition. It keeps lifting us. So Harry, that's a great idea to extend it beyond. Although I suspect India can still give us a few lessons about hockey.
Thanks, Mr. Premier. We've got two more questions. Richard Bronowski, and then there's another question near the back row, and then I think we're...
Thank you, Premier. Thanks, Rory. Premier, in the 1970s we had a coordinating machinery for relation to Japan when we realised at the Commonwealth level, at the state levels, and in the business level that Japanese trading houses and others were trading off one against the other. Now, we've heard the word competition here today. Before you make your trips, it's a question of curiosity I have. Do you consult with COAG, through COAG, with your Premier partners, or do you have discussions with other premiers in a separate way about India? Or, is there some kind of... Do you think it's a good idea to have some kind of coordinating machinery, or should it just be this state and what we do in India?
I don't believe much in kumbaya. I say that within the Liberal Party, I say it within the Federation. Richard, what we do is actively consult with federal agencies. Those... I think you asked me the question about whether we should be as aggressively in the field last time with trade officers and the like. So we do seek to use the expertise that exists through the Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade. And that's why I say, whether in India or China, I've been incredibly impressed by the skill and the depth of understanding that the Consul Generals, the Trade Commissioners and others have had. But they have admitted to me, I have to be honest, that their job is a national job. So if someone wants to buy wheat or wool or coal, they can point them to Australia, but they won't tell them we're in Australia to invest. And of course, we have an interest in New South Wales, an economy that can have a significant influence on the national growth figure in trying to get as much of that trade investment to New South Wales. So I don't believe that Anna Bligh and Ted Beattie and Colin Barnett and I are ever going to have a cartel that carves up world trade. I think that would be a bad thing. As someone believes in competition, I think that would be a bad thing. Do we have informal discussions about it? Yes. And it's probably not surprising, Richard, that the person I've discussed most, the people I've discussed most trading relationships with China and India are former Labor premiers, John Brumby and Mike Grant from South Australia. Perhaps because they've now, put their cues back in the rack.
We'll take one last question. The lady over here on my right.
Thank you. Good morning, Premier Giovanna Arrarde. Look, you just mentioned that there is an intention from the New South Wales government to promote trade and engagement with also other regions. My question is whether you have any short or medium-term plans to increase the presence of the New South Wales government in the Latin American region, such as the other states of Australia, like Queensland and Victoria, are doing. Thank you.
Absolutely. And we, in addition to appointing a parliamentary secretary for Asia-Pacific Trade, we also have a Deputy Premier who is the Minister for Trade and Investment, and within his portfolio, where Mr Gupta's and Mr Warwick Smith's bodies sit, is our trade and investment engine room, and they are looking across the world, and that does include South America. And so we don't have immediate plans to establish offices in South America. We've just recommitted to establishing an office in North America. But we do have to have an iterative process here. We can't run at the outset. We do have to crawl and learn to get up to speed, which I know drives my friends in the media mad. But frankly, I still think that's the best way to secure long-term returns. One of the things that absolutely affects me is I'm over the made-for-media moments that so often characterised politics in this state for 16 years. I will not come back like a Chamberlain and say peace is at hand after one trade mission to India, but I hope that after 4 or however long I get, we can see real progress being made, because I know that most things in life, it's very rare that you win lotto, which is a moment on a Saturday night, but it's very common that people have taken out tickets for weeks and months in advance in the hope that they will win lotto that time. So I'd like to win lotto for the state, and I know that it'll take a long-term engagement to do so.
Thanks, Mr. Premier. I think that's been a really useful, I think, valuable interaction for us all. May I just say, I guess on behalf of the Lowy Institute, that it's particularly gratifying that a state government is taking this vision of the opportunities and the challenges that India poses, because as we've said, the international policy is changing. State governments clearly do have a role to play, and even just looking at the audience here today, it's very clear that the Indian community and the business community in this state are taking a very, very close interest, as are we all in your efforts, your vision. So I want to thank you on behalf of the Institute, and we certainly look forward to further conversations on this important task.